Welcome back everyone to the second episode in the Minecraft Ideas Academy series. Each video will cover a different aspect of game design that is specific to suggestions and vanilla style mods. Today I'm joined by Endergy, an artist and game designer known primarily for the Endergetic Expansion mod. First thing that I wanted to talk about, I think it would be good to have a general introduction to how you first joined the community and what sort of stuff that you do at the moment.
I see. Well, that's a story, I have to say. Well, it all started on a creative server, and I built I built this upgraded version of the end. And basically, while I was doing that, I was like, I want to actually see these ideas through. So I turned to Reddit, and I started posting suggestions on Reddit. And eventually, well, I think it was you. You came to me and you were telling me these are cool. You should join this community because we're all about this kind of stuff. So I was like, yeah, definitely sounds cool. So I joined, and well, let's just say ever since I joined, I've been getting lots of feedback, criticisms, which is very welcome, about my ideas, and from there I just grew and grew until I became what I am now. And that person is someone who works on mods and projects, and I just make general ideas about stuff, and yeah, and that's where I'm at. And it's all because of Reddit and the MCA server.
Yeah, it's certainly been a ride. I remember when you first joined, and I think I found you. We found you when you first posted the Mahogany Jungle,
Yeah.
and that's changed a lot, hasn't it?
Oh yeah.
What do you reckon has been the most the biggest changes between like how you view specifically the end dimension? Like, what sort of philosophy have you brought up when designing stuff for the end?
Well, let's see. Like back then, for the Mahogany Jungle especially, the ideas, I feel like they weren't very inspired. For example, in the original post, there's the orangutan. Oh, it's a orangutan, but it's in the end. Of course, that's very, again, uninspired. But like Minecraft, it has like very like weird creatures. When it comes to them adding more like unique mobs that aren't based off of real life stuff, they're very like unique. And of course, something like a reskinned monkey isn't gonna cut it. So basically, now when we're working on the Endergetic expansion, mobs are very like they're very unique in their abilities and their appearance, and that's kind of like the whole point is that the end is an alien place. It's not gonna have creatures that are kind of like Earth or the overworld in this case. So, and that's kind of the tricky thing about the end. Well, not the tricky thing, but the exciting thing about the end is that because it's just such a vague area, my creativity can really flow in that dimension.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you know the theme of the end. It's quite alien, and stuff usually has to come like that isn't anything like anything else. So how do you design that sort of stuff? What does your inspiration come from?
It's funny. My inspiration doesn't really come from anything in particular. It's more like just an accumulation of everything that I've experienced and seen. And I guess it's just my subconscious coming up with stuff. But basically, it's really interesting because the end is like the perfect place for me. Like the end is my favorite because it's currently in vanilla Minecraft. It's basically like a blank slate, and it has this theme of sci-fi. So basically, I have to make mobs and stuff that follow this theme of sci-fi, and that's from no other place. And basically, when I want to come up with that, I just get wacky, I guess. Like it doesn't really come from anything specifically. I just come up with a design that works, and I mostly come up with the mechanics first, and then I base the theme and the design around that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sometimes when I'm thinking of ideas, I think, oh, it would be cool if we could do this in Minecraft, or it would be really useful. Like if I'm just playing the game and I said, oh, I wish we had really had a tool that did that, and then it kind of grows from there. So When the Endergetic expansion is kind of, well, not done, but
Hmm.
like really fleshed out with pretty much all the content you want to add, like what do you want the player to get out of that? What sort of abilities do you want them to have?
Um, yeah, and that's interesting too because the end is interesting because it's the end game. Like players are gonna want to go there to get like new cool stuff, like new mechanics, stronger things. But at the same time, you don't want those stronger things to render vanilla stuff obsolete. You want them to be new mechanics. So basically, a player would want to go to the Endergetic expansion to enhance their tool set, basically. For example, taming a buffalo and bringing it to the overworld. It doesn't necessarily render the elytra obsolete. Of course, you're able to ride the buffalo and kind of fly and glide around with it. But the buffalo, its movement is like more like thrusty and stridey, and it's not as like soaring as the elytra is, or as fast as the elytra. Um, so basically, there's just more mechanics when it comes to the end, and that's kind of the idea is that we want to add more and stronger things, but we don't want to render anything obsolete, and that's kind of the goal of the energetic expansion.
That's definitely an important thing to consider
Hmm.
with vanilla. You got to make sure that you don't that you kind of give a reason for other stuff to still exist
Yeah,
instead of just superseding it.
exactly. And I think we've been doing a pretty good job at that so far. But that'll mostly show when we're exploring the other biomes and adding, because currently we only have one biome, but as you know, we're going to be implementing a lot more, and each biome has its
Hmm.
own unique set of mechanics.
Yeah. Speaking of which, we've seen the most people know about the Vibra Jungle
Hmm.
is just about what they've seen. So and there hasn't really been any specific like announcements or anything
Hmm.
showcasing like exactly how the mechanics work. So the theme of the Poised Forest, for example, would be levitation and maybe transport. I guess like it's quite varied, but like
Yeah,
it's a fairly friendly place if you know what you're doing.
yeah, yeah. Um,
But in terms of the Vibra Jungle, what sort of gameplay are you planning to get out of that?
well, the Vibra Jungle, its main mechanic is basically it's all about hyper senses and illusion. It's all about like you know perspective. That's what it's all about. So basically, the Vibra Jungle will offer a lot of different items based around that mechanic, and that mechanic. One of those mechanics is known as hypersense. For example, there's going to be fruit that dangle from the Vibra trees, and you'll be able to, when you eat them, you basically get a quick flash of hypersense, and the mobs around you kind of get highlighted. But it's only like a flash of it, so it's not like kind of overpowered where you like can just like observe all the mobs around you for like 2 minutes. That would probably be pretty overpowered. But just by eating a
Hmm.
chunk of this fruit, you get like a quick flash of hypersense, and there's a lot of mechanics similar to that. But another on the opposite end of the spectrum, there's the mechanics of illusion, where instead of being able to see stuff, you can hide better. For example, there's a mob that we're planning called the Viper Plant, and it has the ability to camouflage and kind of shapeshift into different kinds of crops that appear to be less dangerous. But of course, when you get close to it, it'll reveal itself and attack the player. So we're kind of hoping that this mob will drop something that allows the player to kind of shapeshift in a certain way, and that'll be something to explore for sure, and how that shapeshifting affects how mobs treat you. Of course, shapeshifting, you would still behave the same way. Like you'll still like move like a player. Like nothing will change. The only thing that changes is your appearance and potentially how mobs act towards you. So yeah.
Hmm. And hypersense would be able to counteract that as well if you're playing multiplayer, right?
Yes, if you this new hypersense effect that we're adding, if players are shape shifting, then this hypersense fruit or a potion that you could potentially make with it can reveal players who are shape shifting.
Hmm.
So again, we want to keep in mind that we want to keep balances in mind when we're adding potentially overpowered stuff, you know.
Yeah. Do you automatically kind of drift towards the overpowered stuff and then you think, oh, this would be perfect for the end dimension because it's endgame? Or do you sometimes have ideas where you're like, oh, wow, this would really work in mid game or early game, but then it just doesn't work for the end?
Um, well, um, not I mean, there's a lot of small features that could really show up in the middle game. For example, like I would say the poise cluster is a good example of this because the poise cluster is a fairly simple mechanic in that when you hit it, it floats up and and when you hit it again, it floats up more, but eventually it sinks back down. It's not a very like overpowered mechanic. And for example, another example that we're kind of planning in the Vibra Jungle is the Frizzbloom discs. And basically, the Frizzbloom discs, you can throw them at walls like a frisbee, and they'll actually get stuck in the side of the walls and turn into like temporary platforms that you can climb up and stuff. And again, that's not really an overpowered thing. It's just something to help navigate, you know. So again,
Mm.
not everything has to be overpowered, but if it's a new and engaging mechanic that we're adding, I think it's okay to fit it in the end. Yeah.
Yeah, especially with the general like terrain and just resources that you're bound to come across a lot.
Mhm.
Like it doesn't have to be too powerful. Like it can just be useful. Especially I love it when stuff's added like a mob drops something related to its mechanic, like the Viper plant or the other illusion stuff that you got going on. It's quite a good way to introduce stuff to the player and then say, hey, look, now you can do this.
Yeah, I like to do that a lot. For example, like with the Buffalo, its ability to inflate and its inflation knocks away mobs and stuff. And if you obtain its elastic skin, you can turn that skin into a bunch of items that can inflate, like the Boof Block, which knocks mobs away, or the Buffalo Vest, which you can use to um, perform multiple jumps in the air, stuff like that.
Hmm. And when you see other people brainstorming for stuff that they could do add to the end, what do you think is the most common like pitfalls that they come across?
Um, a lot of the things that I see, so there's like a couple things. Sometimes the ideas are kind of overthought of, I feel like. They might make like a lot of complexities with certain mobs. Like I I can't really like give an example, but they'll I think they overthink it sometimes. And on the opposite spectrum, sometimes they underthink it. I can't say I've seen this before, but for an example, like let's add a purple furnace that cooks stuff faster if you use ender pearls in it. Like, um, of course, I would never add something like that because it's not very interesting and it renders furnaces obsolete, and I don't think it really has a niche in the game, really, you know.
Mm.
And I think that's one of the things is that people have trouble finding niches for the game or
Yeah, like sometimes the
purposes.
mobs have just got way too much stuff, and you could just kind of like maybe separate them out into different mobs and have them work together, like they kind of do in the Poised Forest.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah.
Another another idea I hear fairly often is end villages,
hmm Yeah,
and
that's an interesting one for sure. Cause I don't think I would want in villagers, or at least like thriving ones. I wouldn't want thriving things in the end because I like to think of the end as maybe something that used to be cool. Like maybe there used to be a civilization at the end, hence the end cities, for example. But I feel like something happened to the end that made it not that anymore. And that's so
mm,
I feel like if there were to be some sort of civilization, they have to be like corrupted hooligans or something.
yeah. it actually kind of surprised me when they added piglins to the Nether because I mean they are kind of savage and they do trade in a different way, which is different to people just suggesting pigmen villages.
Mm-hmm.
But it kind of it made a lot of people suggest end villages, just to put it that way. But yeah,
Yeah.
the end definitely has a different feel to it. I remember people suggesting like that they don't want the end to get an update because it would make it feel less barren. And I
Yeah.
guess like part of that's nostalgia, but part of it's kind of founded in a belief that the end is supposed to be a mysterious place. It's not supposed to necessarily be thriving. And like, of course, you got to add something. So like, you might as well make it lively. But civilization, on the other hand, they're kind of like two different ideas. Civilization kind of devalues the barrenness of the end more than like life. And speaking of which, like, do you kind of consider how the end is intended to feel? Like, how much of that do you say, oh, that's just because the end hasn't got an update, versus, oh, that was intended by the developers? How much do you consider like the existing themes of the end when you're thinking of ideas for Endergetic?
Um, well, I definitely want to keep those in mind because, you know, I want to make sure that the end kind of sticks to its roots a little bit. However, I think of the end as a big missed opportunity currently, cause cause the thing is the end is it's currently like a very blank slate, and it has a theme of sci-fi, and I think that combination has so much potential, and has so much you can add to it, and it you could say that it's supposed to be barren, and I think that is the case, and I think that's true. But I don't think that adding more biomes will take away from the mysteriousness or um or lack of intelligent life. There's very little mystery in the current end. You know what I mean? Because once you see one, that's all of it. So I think adding more biomes will enhance the mystery of the end. You know what I mean? It lets the player know that there's more to discover here, because
Hmm.
there's not much to discover in the end. And adding more, there's more potential mystery to the end to find.
Yeah, it makes me wonder sometimes why people almost want the end to be barren, but it's not. But I'm not sure if barren end is what they want. It's more about an end that kind of feels barren but isn't barren. So
Yeah,
it's incomplete. There's stuff for the player to discover, to theorize about, to find out, but there's still plenty of stuff that can be used as a basis for that,
yeah.
I guess.
I think a good example of this is feeling barren but not actually barren is we're gonna be revamping the chorus biome, the current vanilla end biome, because our biomes, they're just so full of new features and stuff that the current end is gonna be a bit underwhelming compared to it. So we decided to revamp it. However, in revamping it, we have to consider the original feeling of the biome, and we don't want to remove like its barren feeling, because it does feel barren, the chorus, the current chorus biome. But we have to add more features to it. So basically, all the mobs that we're adding to this biome, they're all very kind of like secluded mobs, I would say. For example, the perpoids that we're adding, they rest on top of chorus plants most of the time. So you won't be seeing them being like active too often because they're resting and they blend into the environment. And with the eagles that we'll be adding, they have nests and stuff, and they're not commonly seen roaming the land, though they can be. Um, so yeah, and the new types of plants that we're adding for the chorus end follow in the chorus footsteps, and that is it's another type of like coral kind of vegetation of sorts. So yeah, we want to make sure that we keep the barrenness in mind for the end, but we want to have it like hidden. You know what I mean? And that's not the case for all biomes, of course, but for this biome, it is in particular.
Yeah, I think it's really important that people understand like how rule breaking the well not rule breaking but how kind of paradoxical the end is supposed to be, how alien, how weird it is, and I mean there's a fair amount of stuff to like even from real life that could use that. Like I think you thought of the buffalo and you didn't realize that some frogs actually do hatch on their back, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So like sometimes real life can be even weirder. Like if you just take some examples from even like deep sea creatures could even be turned into an end creature.
Oh yeah.
Or just anything like even weird like physics from real life. Like you could take some examples from quantum theory or relativity. Anything that kind of warps stuff and it can make the player feel really kind of like this is a new place. This is unlike anything in everywhere else. I remember Vinny a while ago talking about how meta the end music was even. So even though you got all this weird stuff, like the end poem and the end in general could also serve as a kind of meta way to look at the game. And speaking of which, like sometimes when people suggest stuff, they tend to forget that Minecraft is at its core a sandbox game. Like you're supposed to have stuff that you can do stuff with and you can build and you can create. And I think the Endergetic Expansion does a good job of adding stuff for the player to play around with, like the booth flow blocks, for example, allowing the player to transport stuff. Like there's a lot of features that can be used for a variety of different ways. So, how do you make sure that the stuff that you add has many different purposes? Is it something that you can think of, or is it just something that you kind of put out that's open ended and just kind of leave to the players to think of stuff? Do you think about how players would use stuff?
I'd say I think of it because when I make a new biome concept, I usually think of what's the theme of this biome and what kind of mechanics are going to go into this biome. Because that's kind of how I organize stuff when it comes to making a new dimension. I organize it in terms of mechanics and such. So basically, when I start thinking of a theme, I then come up with the mobs and what those mobs will bring to the table and what kind of mechanics I want to explore. Because yes, this is very much a sandbox game, so I want to bring tools to these players, and that's kind of where it all starts. And once I think of this biome, I just come up with tool after tool, and I definitely do keep in mind that I want to keep these tools kind of vague so that players can use them for many different things. For like the booth block, it just inflates and knocks enemies away from it. Like it's a rather simple mechanic, but it's very flexible in terms of usage, and that's kind of I definitely keep that in mind when I'm designing ideas and such. So
So you start from a vague theme and think about what players could do with it instead of just saying, "I want something that can specifically do this." You try and keep it broad.
but when I do have it when I do keep it broad, for example, like with the poised forest, I'm like, okay, this place is levitation theme. It's gonna have like floaty things. Of course, I then like specialize certain items into certain mechanics. For example, like sure the buffalo helps you fly around and slam onto stuff, but in the future the balloon fruit you'll be able to tie them to you, and it doesn't exactly make you fly like horizontally very fast, but it very much allows you to control your vertical height like very easily. So again, it's like once I come up with a vague idea, I then make very um, you know, kind of like more complex ideas that kind of branch off of it. So yeah. So yeah.
What do you reckon is the project, like excluding anything you're not allowed to talk about? Like you mostly come up with ideas to the end, and then you've also done a couple miscellaneous ones, and you've also done the soul wastes. So like, what do you reckon has been the project where you've had to consider like really making sure that things mesh well with vanilla. Because like the Endergetic Expansion fits really well into vanilla, but it's also kind of going on top of vanilla. Like how do you make sure that if you're for example, if you're trying to change or add really finicky things that might have a lot of problems when they're added to the game. Have you ever like come across something like that, and how do you usually resolve it?
Hmm. Well, out of all the projects that I've been in, I'd say the Endergetic Expansion is probably the biggest one that I want to make sure feels vanilla and doesn't clash with vanilla things. Um, but basically, when it comes to our stuff interacting with the vanilla stuff, we have to be very careful about it because when we want stuff to to interact with vanilla stuff, that also potentially means that we want this stuff to interact with stuff that's being added to mods and stuff. So we basically want to make sure that again, it's kind of a vague idea so that it can be applied to most things. And if they're vague ideas, then they're flexible, and players can combine them themselves into vanilla. So when you first implement something that's kind of vague, it do, it might not like spawn in an area that meshes with vanilla, but players can take it into their bases and such, and turn it into something that meshes well. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Let's pivot to your art for a while, actually.
sure thing.
So, like, you're a traditional artist as well as a pixel artist,
That's right.
and I noticed when you first entered the community, like, you weren't too familiar with the principles of pixel art, but it still managed to. I mean, I'm not an artist, but I still think it looked cool. So, like,
Hmm.
how much has your traditional art kind of influenced, and also kind of how's your pixel art developed since you first joined the community, and what advice would you give to people who are new to pixel art?
Well, let's see. Before I joined the community, I had never put a pixel on a screen before. I was all traditional art before I joined the MCA, and basically, eventually, people kind of like motivated me to switch to making resource packs. Because before in my Reddit posts, of course, I was making drawings for the mobs and such. So, they eventually convinced me that I should switch to making resource packs. And I did that, and I would pixel art the blocks and such. But I didn't model, and then eventually they convinced me to model. But of course, with the pixel art, I there was a lot of troubles in the beginning. I didn't know what hue shifting was. Of course, as someone who was into traditional art, I kind of had a vague idea about it, but I didn't know about like color counts and keeping them like very limited and such. And many of the pixel artists on the MCA, they very much helped in showing me what I should be doing when it comes to pixel art. And um, basically, if you are new to pixel art out there, I would suggest that you definitely turn to these talented people on the MCA server. If you're on the MCA server, uh, turn to these people because they helped me out so much, and I advanced so much in such a small time. I have to say, and it's all because of these people. They helped me all the way through. So definitely turn to them.
Yeah, just make sure that when you're doing so, you got to remain constructive. Like,
Oh yeah.
art is a pretty personal thing, and you got to make sure that you don't crap on it or do anything like that. Because like MCA is a lot bigger since Endergy joined, so it's a lot been also a lot harder to moderate. So
Hmm.
it's really important for everyone just to always stay constructive. Like, we're always trying to help each other and make each other better, and help each other improve. So yeah, it's definitely important to get help from other people, but at the same time make sure that you're staying friendly and respectful.
Exactly. Yeah, it can kind of go both ways sometimes. Sometimes people, when they post art and people kind of like, poop on it, it's it's gonna sometimes it'll demotivate them from, doing what they want to do. And um you don't be one of those people. Don't be one of those people who kind of like turn people away from being creative. I'm a strong advocate for creativity, and if you do that, I'll be very disappointed in you, and and definitely try to just make people aware of what they can do better, and if you can, show them. Whenever I criticize someone, I like to show them uh, how it could be better. That way, I'm not just like speaking into the air and not getting anything through. I like to be able to convey how they can improve. I think that's the best way, because art's a visual thing, of course. So you kind of gotta show them sometimes. So definitely, yeah, be that guy. Don't be the other one. So yeah.
It's definitely important to show how people can be better instead of just telling them. Because especially if you're new to art, people say stuff like, "Oh, keep your color count low. Oh, you need to hue shift."
Mm-hmm.
All that sort of stuff. Like if they don't know what it is, some people, everyone learns differently. Everyone, everyone takes in information differently. Visual, audio, all sorts of stuff like that.
Yeah,
Learning
exactly.
is a complex process.
Cause when I was on the MCA server and artists were telling me about pixel art, at first like they would tell me like, oh, you gotta do like all of these complex techniques like a hue shifting, and I'd be like, what's a hue shifting? And then they would and then I would kind of end up forcing them to show me because they can't really explain it to me because I don't know these terms. Well, now of course now I do. I know a lot about that kind of stuff now, but before, and for anyone who's new to this, they don't know much about it. So you just got to show them. Explaining it's kind of hard if they don't know the terms and stuff. So yeah,
Mm.
I agree with that.
Yeah, fair enough. I did want to talk about the soul waste at one point. Uh,
Yeah.
Actually, do you think there's anything that, like, anything in the soul wastes that is, like, kind of fundamentally different to how you come up with stuff? How do you treat the nether as opposed to how you treat the end when you are thinking of stuff?
Well, the Nether's interesting because one of the reasons that I like the end a lot is because it's a blank slate, and the only theme that it has is basically sci-fi, you know. And so my creativity can flow like crazy. But with the Nether, it kind of has an identity already. It's supposed to be a kind of like hellscape, underworld, fiery, scary place. And of course, that's more of a it's more of a complex theme than just what the end is right now. So when I'm coming with ideas for the end, it's a little it's a little bit harder because I have to keep in mind the theme of the end, and the mechanics kind of have to be based around it, you know. So for example, like a levitation theme for the Nether would not work. Like there's a lot of themes that work for the end, you know. For example, like the Nether has fire and stuff, and you could kind of do the same. Like the Nether has like fire and magma. You can kind of do the same for the end because it's so vague that you can turn fire and lava into ender acid, and it kind of is like the same idea. And the end's just so vague. So the Nether, it's just so much. It's trickier. That's yeah. So when making the Soul Sand Valley, or no, that's the actual one. When making the Soul Wastes, when making the Soul Waste, I had to consider the themes. So I was like, ooh, spooky souls, you gotta have souls in there, and like phasing and like all that kind of stuff. So yeah, and that's why it's. I haven't thought of more Nether biomes since then, of course, and that's kind of the reason is that it's kind of hard to come up with more themes that aren't explored in the end already. So, yeah. Especially now with the
Mm.
Nether update being here.
Yeah, speaking of which, how much has the Nether update kind of changed your ideas of what the Nether could be?
Um, uh, the thing is, with the Nether update, they added a lot of cool biomes. and I'm very happy about that. But the reason why I did not think of like that much amount of biomes is because whenever I have this thing where whenever I think of a biome, I have to have all the mechanics that go uh into that biome and mobs thought of, you know. And that's not really the case with the nether vanilla biomes that they're adding. For example, with the, let's say, the basalt delta, it's definitely a new biome and it looks very cool, but there's zero new mechanics added to it. You know what I mean? So
Mm.
if if I were to go with that kind of idea and just add biomes for the sake of adding biomes and new blocks, of course, I could come up with a lot of ideas for the end for biomes. Like I'd have biomes overflowing, and the same case would be for the end. But I have this thing where I have to come up with a lot of mechanics for each biome to make each biome worth going to. So yeah, that's how it is for me.
Mm. I think the philosophy that Mojang has run with is making sure that, I mean, they're not making a mod; they're changing the base game, so they got to cater to a lot more people.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not exactly sure, but the Endergetic Expansion, like mods, tend to be for older people, and they've had to balance out the Nether with how difficult it is, or how simple it is. Even they're probably limited by that, as well as like how much stuff they're able to add. So like when their most primary philosophy is, I guess, is first of all making the Nether livable,
Mm-hmm.
and then they've just tried to kind of spread that out to biomes. Like they've moved ghasts to the Soul Sand Valley, they've moved Endermen to the Walked Forests, they've moved magma cubes. Well, they haven't moved them. I think they still spawn in the Nether wastes,
Yeah.
but they've kind of like spread them out almost.
Mm-hmm.
And it might seem kind of like a cheap move at first, but if you're just looking for an experience and not necessarily a bunch of different mechanics, then I think the way that they've kind of spread it out and tried to let kind of the emergent things do the heavy lifting, like the basalt deltas. Its terrain is so different,
Mm-hmm.
and they've definitely relied hard on just the feel of the biome and not necessarily mechanics that they'd put in it.
Yeah.
If you get what I mean.
Yeah, and I definitely get that because the overworld is full of that kind of stuff. The overworld is full of biomes, and most of the biomes they don't add any new mechanics or anything. They mostly just add like a new wood set or a new type of ground block, and I think that's definitely okay. And I think the Nether update, it's good that it's doing that kind of that same treatment because I don't think it's necessarily good to have every single biome in the game overflowing with different amount of mechanics, you know? Because
Mm.
otherwise, you know, every single area you go to might be a little overwhelming. You know, sometimes you just gotta have like solemn areas or just areas that, you know, maybe aren't significant in terms of mechanics, but just it just has a different visual style to it. So in Minecraft is a game all about building. So having different visual styles um is kind of a mechanic on its own for a game like
Mm.
Minecraft. So I think I think it's okay to for the Nether update to do something like that.
Yeah. Would you have considered putting blue in the Nether before the Nether update?
I always dabbled in the idea of blue in the Nether, but I never agreed with some of the ways I've seen it. I always thought it could be possible, but I never saw a way that it worked. For example, um, like like ice in the Nether, I've seen that before, and of course that's an example of putting blue in the Nether, and I can't say I feel strongly about that, but I think I always thought it was possible though, but I never saw someone do it right. And I think the Nether update
Mm-hmm.
is doing pretty good. And I think that's in my opinion, I think that's mostly because of the fog changes. Like normally blue in the Nether would really stick out, but because the fog changes color, the fire and such end up kind of like blending in with the environment, and it ends up looking really cool and like a really different and diverse area from what you're used to, rather than just being a pimple in the nether. But it's actually,
Mm.
yeah. I think they worked it well, uh, and that's mostly due to the fog changing color, I think.
Yeah, they've definitely put a lot of thought into the ambience and definitely the music as well. Like they've really emphasized how the biome feels instead of it just being a static thing that has stuff in it.
Yeah, I love the new music.
Yeah, me too.
But yeah, I agree because i again, Minecraft being a game of building, that's kind of what it's about, is introducing just kind of like different templates for the player to build on. And the end is now really full of new templates. And honestly, my base is going to be in the Nether when this update comes out. So, yeah, I'm
Yeah,
I'm
probably same for me.
I'm happy with the update. However, I do wish um currently in the Nether the Nether has become very scary. There's lots of cool new ambience and stuff, but there aren't any like dangers in some areas that kind of justify that feeling. You know what I mean? There's lots of
Mm.
tension in the Nether, but I don't think there are in some biomes there aren't mobs that justify that tension. For mostly like um I guess what I'm saying is I just want to see a monster. I just want to see a new monster. That,
Yeah, that's fair enough.
yeah. Cuz like I always like it when they add new enemies because most of the time when they add a new enemy it introduces a new mechanic that the enemy does. And I'm always all for new and engaging ways to combat enemies. So I just want to see a new enemy. That's all. But other than that, I think the net update's been pretty hunky dory. I'm very happy with it.
Mm-mm. It's interesting. In the Soul Wastes, there's that mechanic where the Reapers can't see you unless if you're sneaking. So
Hmm.
it's kind of similar to how Mojang did their piglin behavior. How piglins aggro at you if you mine gold blocks or touch any of their gold, and it's almost like it's slightly higher level in terms of abstraction than the simple act of sneaking. It's almost like the player has to figure out themselves how they're going to make sure that they sneak when they're looting the catacombs in the soul wastes.
Hmm.
So it's quite similar how a fair bit of your mechanics kind of ended up reflecting in the Nether update.
Yeah, I mean a little bit. I actually really like they did add a very small few couple of angry boys in the Nether, like the Hoglin and the Piglins sometimes. And I am happy with how they combat. Of course, they do what typical mobs do and come up to you and hurt you, or they shoot you. But the way they interact with the environment is so much more engaging. Because, like, for example, with the Hoglins, they're scared of, what is it, the warped fungus? And I like that the player can discover this because warped fungus occasionally spawns naturally in the Crimson Forest, and players can come across like hoglins running away from well, the player will think it's running away from them, but then the player will notice that they're standing on top of a warped fungus. And I just like that feeling that you can discover something like that, and then from there the player can like carry warped fungus with them, and whenever they're about to be hoarded by a bunch of hoglins, just place a warped fungus down. And yeah, I just like that they made it a little bit more interesting than it could have been. And yeah, and especially that you can use the environment. It really does feel like you could truly live in the Nether now. I like it a lot.
Mm. I think especially one bit of the sandboxy vibe that they have to maintain, it also is largely dependent on interactions between the different things. Because like if there's interactions, you can control those interactions, and that's pretty sandboxy if you ask me.
Hmm. I agree. I really think it's all about interactions in terms of sandbox game because in a sandbox game you kind of want to make the player feel like they're kind of living in the world of sorts because they're building their precious world here. You want to make sure that they feel close to the world. So, and that's kind of the case with like poised forest stuff is that like you can interact with almost everything in that biome in some way, and like punching like the poise clusters causes it to float away, or like punching a puff bug hive will cause them to like shoot towards you. Or you could shoot the puff bug hive and to your advantage, they'll strike down the nearest thing next to it. So like it's all about like little engagements like that that really make you feel like this world that you're building in belongs to you, I think. And I'm glad that there's a lot of that kind of stuff in the Nether update. So yeah.
It's definitely been good inspiration.
For sure. Yeah, I'm very happy with another update so far. I just wish there was one more or two more monsters. Yeah,
Yeah, we can all dream.
yeah.
Is there anything else like that you think what you handle differently in the Soul Wastes versus the Poised Forest that you think is worth letting everyone know about?
Hmm. Hmm.
Like I really like the soul mechanics. It's quite expansive.
Yeah. The soul mechanic. Let me tell you, like that one. It's probably one of the more controversial ideas I've come up with because of how, like, I don't know, like there's so much to it. It's kind of a complex idea, and I'm not sure how keen, Mojang would want to have such a complex thing in the game. Because again, Minecraft reaches a very ranged audience, and you want to make sure that the features you do have in the game appeal to those to a range of people. However, at the same time, I think a little bit of Minecraft is kind of about having um, some sort of complexities that the players on the opposite end of the spectrum who love complexity, Minecraft has those kind of things. But most of those things are accidental technical things, like discovering like a slime chunk and turning it into like a slime farm. Like if that's definitely not intentional design, but that's something for complex players. I feel like the soul mechanic is kind of like is an intentional complex thing. Uh, yeah, that's. But of course, there are simple things that are part of the soul mechanic.
Yeah, I've been thinking about how I would do it because if you wanted to implement that, you'd probably have to completely separate out the mob and its AI. So if you wanted to do all the PvP stuff where you can like invade other players and control them and everything,
Mm-hmm.
like that's probably gonna be really hard to pull off. But if you just made it so that the souls with the different personalities that you can put in the different mobs, like that, just simplifying it down, it is a very intentionally complex mechanic because it's supposed to cater to a lot of things, PvP, mob AI, manipulation. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there could be definitely ways to simplify it down to achieve a similar effect. Like the PvP stuff is really cool, but it's also really complex. So even if you just had the ability to switch out different personalities from mobs, that could have a fair amount of possibility associated with it.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why the soul mechanic I almost kind of excused its complexity is because the soul mechanic has the capabilities of reaching so many aspects of the game. I think. And I think in order for, a mechanic to do something like that, it kind of does need a layer of complexity in order to reach such a far and wide area of the game. For example, I would say that brewing in Minecraft is kind of complex, I think. Of course, once you discover everything there is to know about brewing, it kind of like isn't as complex anymore. But the same can be said about the soul mechanic. But like with brewing, like all the different kinds of potion effects kind of reach far and wide across the different aspects of the game. I think in order for a mechanic to reach far and wide across the different aspects of the game, it kind of has to have a certain layer of complexity. And that's why I kind of excuse the kind of complexity that the soul mechanic has in the soul waste biome. But yeah, if Mojang were to implement a mechanic like that, I think it would need some touches to it some simplification for sure.
Mm.
But yeah. Um, but like with the soul wastes, when it comes to approaching it differently compared to the poised forest, I really think it really comes down to the established theme that the different dimensions have, and it again, it's just trickier to come up with different themes. I mean, other than that, there isn't much to it. You know what I mean? Again, it's just an for me, it's just another biome with new mechanics. It's just about what kind of mechanics, if they fit the theme of that dimension. You know what I mean?
Mm.
So
Yeah.
I think it really is all about the environment, and it's just trickier for the end because or the Nether rather, because the Nether's a little bit more established than the end, especially again after the Nether update.
Mm. It's weird because I tend to flourish in places where I've got a lot of constraints, like upgrade aquatic, for example. I was heavily modifying the progression of oceans and trying to make everything fit in. So it's kind of like a design. A design's almost opposite. Like I try and fiddle with existing stuff, and you tend to build on. I'm not saying that's all we do, but
Hmm.
yeah, it requires a different type of skill in order to pull off, and a different type of interest as well.
Yeah, and that's kind of the interesting thing about the end or the Nether, because the Nether before the update, and it was kind of in this like middle ground where it has stuff in it and it has an established theme, but it doesn't have enough stuff to build off of, you know? It was like a weird area. I feel like now that the Nether update is out, like I feel like I could get like the upgraded aquatic treatment, and I feel like I could come up with the ideas for the Nether now that the update's out. Like now that it really has established themes, I think adding to those biomes would be like really easy. I feel kind of like what Upgrade Aquatic does. So I think the Nether was just in a weird middle ground before the update, you know, and that's why it was tricky. But now that it's out, I think it's a little easier to add on to it. So yeah,
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how I can tinker with it.
yeah, I think it'll be
Is
fun.
there anything else you wanted to talk about, like regarding the entire thing?
Um, I think I wanted to mention, like we mentioned pixel art and stuff, but my advancements kind of came through more than just pixel art, I would say. Again, I started out with drawing, and then I switched to making texture packs, and then eventually, people convinced me to actually make 3D models. And of course, making 3D models is a lot more different than making pixel art or drawing. Like, going 3D was completely new to me. And of course, again, MCA helped me through that challenge too. People who were, skilled in modeling helped me through all of that stuff. But then after that, I went into animating. Like, once I got into making mods, I had to learn how to animate stuff. So that went even further, and then like even recently, you know, when you're making a mod, sometimes, certain like I wanted to have sounds for the Endergetic expansion before we released the Poised Forest, and our current sound designer was a little bit busy, so I was like, what if I make sounds? I could try that. So I made sounds, and basically what I'm getting at is I really expanded my plate in terms of my abilities to make stuff, and I really think that's important when it comes to being like a good modder or a good idea person. And that is it's good to be able to actually execute your ideas as much as possible. And that's what I want to be able to do is just I want to fully fledge out my ideas as much as I can before I put it in other people's hands. For example, like one of the things that I'm incapable of currently is being able to code. And of course, for the energetic expansion, we have Smelly Modder who helps do the code for the energetic expansion. But before he does the code, I help. I do all the modeling and the texture work, and I come up with the concept. And I think it's important to, if you're an idea person, to just fully fledge out those ideas so it's easier for the coders to, you know, understand what you want and get at it. And I'm glad that the MCA helped me be able to, have all these different abilities to fully fledge out ideas like the way I can currently. So yeah.
It's also important to kind of gain an appreciation for what the coders are trying to pull off, especially with complex stuff.
Yeah, I know. I can't thank the coders enough. They do sometimes I come up with ideas that are just kind of like out there, and they have to code it, and I can't help but feel bad for them sometimes. But they do it, and they do a great job, and I couldn't be happier with them, and I can't thank them enough. But yeah, and that's kind of one of the reasons why I'm incapable of coding, because it's hard, and it's hard for those. So yeah.
Definitely can confirm.
Oh yeah.
Right, do you want to wrap things up there, or any parting words?
I think I have one more message to give, and that is, folks out there who want to be content creators for anything really. For me specifically, it's Minecraft, of course. But if you discover that you have a passion for something, I suggest that you tackle that passion like as soon as possible, especially you youngsters out there, because eventually you're gonna go to college and it's gonna be hard to pursue those passions. I'm currently in college and I really have a full plate right now because I have to balance all of these projects that I'm passionate about, but I also have to worry about pursuing college and pursuing a job and all that stuff. It's not fun. So, youngsters out there, pursue your passions as soon as possible and, just follow your dreams, folks. and that, so, yeah, that's what I have to say. Well,
Some very fitting last words.
yes.
Thanks for coming on the show, Endergy, and thank you all for listening. If you enjoy this podcast, let us know by leaving a like, and if you really enjoy what we do, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Special thanks to Adele for pledging $5 this month. Patrons and people who nitro boost the Minecraft Abnormals Discord server get access to a super secret mod with a lot of interesting plans. There will be more episodes of the Minecraft Ideas Academy later on, so if that interests you, subscribe and hit the bell, and soon it should be up for you to enjoy. Links to Endergy's Twitter, Reddit, and the CurseForge page for the Endergetic Expansion mod are in the description of this video. Until next time, stay abnormal.